So far, we've been talking about why extreme athletes take such risks to participate in their respective sports, whether they be base jumping, paragliding, or rock climbing. We've touched on their desire to go beyond most people's physical limits and on the excitement and thrill they experience thanks to their sport. We've also talked about the high social status. By that I mean the praise and admiration which they are awarded by their peers, especially if they are young adults. However, we have not touched upon a question that many people ask when they hear about these high-risk, dangerous activities. Aren't these athletes afraid? After all, we've been talking about situations in the air, on or beneath the sea, on land, where they face not only serious injury for the slightest slip or mistake, but even death. Interestingly enough, though, it appears that fear is one of the factors that actually motivates and drives people who take part in extreme sports. I'm going to talk about a recent piece of research by Eric Breimer and Robert Schweitzer, which was published in 2012 in the Journal of Health Psychology. In the study, Breimer and Schweitzer interviewed 15 Western extreme athletes from sports like base jumping, surfing, and climbing, and asked them about their feelings before, during, and after they engaged in these activities. After the interviews, they listened to the recordings and wrote down what the athletes had said. Then, they analyzed these transcripts, highlighting anything the extreme sports people had said about fear. What they found was quite interesting. First, it's worth saying that in previous studies about extreme sports, many researchers describe such athletes as generally fearless. They seem to engage in their activities with a self-possession that any normal person would not feel in a situation where they might very well die. Nevertheless, Breimer and Schweitzer in their research found that fear is actually something that all of their interviewees talked about experiencing, both before and during their extreme sport activity. Here is a quote from one base jumper. "The depth of fear that I felt in my life, the intensity, it's miserable, it really is. The whole idea of no fear, it's rubbish. Fear in adventure is a miserable, gut-wrenching, terrible experience. It's awful." Here's another extreme athlete speaking. "The most normal thing to be saying at a time like this is, 'I'm scared, I hope I don't wet my pants.' If you want the truth, if you want a true slogan for these kinds of sports, it is, 'Oh, please, don't let me die.' That's a normal response." So fear is experienced by extreme sports people. But of course, if they just stopped there, with the fear, there wouldn't be any extreme sports, would there? Instead, many of them accept the fear, but also accept that such a feeling is natural and that there is no avoiding it. Let's look at this quote from a mountain climber. "It feels just really scary and wanting to turn back and run, and of course you can't do that because you came there to do it, and so you have to actually face your fears, which is an exciting bit too. But even when you are experienced, you know when it's scary because it should be scary. That's the way it is." Thus, acceptance of fear, and not avoidance of it, appears to be an important attribute, a key characteristic of extreme sports people. Another way that extreme athletes deal with fear is to embrace it. What I mean is that they value it. Some of them recognize that fear is an important part of survival and that being afraid can help them to be more careful, more aware of safety, and more attentive to details. On the next slide, we see one participant of the study talking about fear in this way. "People are afraid of fear, but fear is what keeps you alive. It's your fear that stops you from standing right on the very edge. Fear is the most important thing in survival, the most important thing." How do these extreme athletes control their fear then? After all, most of us, in extreme situations, tend to panic, and panic can be deadly in such circumstances. One climber talked to himself to reduce the fear, to control the panic. However, a number of extreme athletes pointed to the importance of experience like this one. "I think that the ability to relax and stay focused, in a situation of extreme danger comes down to experience to a certain degree. I think panic is the reaction of a person who has limited experience in an extreme situation. The last finding that Breimer and Schweitzer present about fear and extreme athletes is the one that brings me back to the main question of this lecture. Why do people choose to take risks in extreme sports? It turns out that several of the participants in their interviews talked about how their lives changed for the better after learning to control, to conquer their fears. As one extreme athlete states, "We do such things for a number of reasons, but one of the powerful reasons for me is overcoming my own fears. That gives you so much more of an insight into your being, into your whole potential and your capacity." The ability to face fear and get through it helped them not only in their sport, but to improve their life. To quote a base jumper, "Because we've overcome these fears in a physical environment, other fears are generally insignificant. I suppose when you have faced serious injury or death, then fears of being late, or losing your job, or getting a low mark on a test do seem small in comparison." Therefore, in looking at the motivations for extreme sport participation, fear, specifically the managing and overcoming of fear, should take center stage, should be given primary attention. Extreme athletes are not the fearless daredevils of stereotype. Thanks to Breimer and Schweitzer's research, we now understand that they feel fear, accept it as natural and even as vital to survival, and use their experience to face it, manage it, and overcome it, not only in their sport, but in other aspects of their lives. Now, let's move on to one final reason of why people engage in extreme sports.